Temperatures are rising as Kenya heads to the polls on August 8th.
9 out of 10 Kenyans say that they have seen false news around the general election.
This is what the fake news trap looks like.
Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. Here are some of the media stories we're covering this week. Kenya has an election coming, and some of the campaign ads are not what they seem to be.
Omar.
The case of Omar Khadr, child soldier turned millionaire, and the way the Canadian news media have covered the story. Join the club. The latest government to say it wants to shut down Al Jazeera is Israel's. And who needs movie trailers in China when you can watch Communist Party propaganda instead? This Tuesday, Kenyans head to the polls in what is expected to be a tightly contested election, pitting the incumbent president, Uhuru Kenyatta, against his old rival, Raila Odinga. Kenyatta and Odinga faced each other back in 2013 when Kenyatta won, partly due to a pioneering social media strategy. Those campaigns were mostly above board, with a few attack ads here and there, but this time around it's different, because the fake news phenomenon has hit Kenya. The country's recent political history makes the upsurge in fake news troubling. In late 2007, Odinga lost a close election, the results of which he disputed. Protests turned to unrest and ethnic violence that left more than 1,000 dead. The concern now is, if fake news builds expectations that go unmet, Kenyans could see history repeat itself. Then there's the outside element, PR companies and number crunchers. African politicians often hire Western firms, but it's Kenyatta's reported relationship with a company called Cambridge Analytica that got our attention. The company operates in the murky political margins, offering data analysis and PR advice, strategic communications. And the people behind it have, to varying degrees, been credited with helping land Donald Trump in the White House and with helping the Leave side win Britain's Brexit referendum, which has Kenyans looking closely, wondering what Cambridge Analytica is up to this time. Our starting point this week is Nairobi. July 10th, roughly 1 month prior to Election Day, and Kenyans start seeing a new video on their social media feeds. It's called Rila 2020 and purports to provide a vision of what the country would look like 3 years into a Raila Odinga presidency.
It was a very scary video. It set out to portray a post-apocalypse Kenya, where after Raila becomes president, everything falls apart.
It says that it will be a Kenya full of violence, the opposition would be stifled, every public infrastructure would be dilapidated.
They said that, for example, that there will not be enough water for Kenyans, that women will be giving birth in the streets. It was professionally done, and it was a classic case of propaganda.
We don't know who did it, but we know whose campaign it serves. Obviously, it serves Kenyatta's campaign.
Although that video was propagandistic and provocative, it does not meet the definition of fake news. But there's been plenty of that in Kenya. Bogus news reports branded as the work of BBC and CNN have made the rounds on social media. Both included fake polling data suggesting the incumbent, President Kenyatta, was poised to win.
Reveals an increase in the popularity of the incumbent by about 1.5%.
Prophecies of a Kenyatta re-election have also appeared online on a fake news site called foreignpolicynews.com, which, if the byline is to be believed, has only one writer on staff, a Thomas Greenfield. Mr. Greenfield takes constant liberty with the facts, routinely attacking Raila Odinga, and seems to have stolen his name from a former U.S. State Department official based in Africa, Linda Thomas Greenfield. Whatever form these fake news stories take, many Kenyans are ready to believe them. And even if they don't, many are able and willing to circulate them.
Social media basically has taken the fall, and most of the time the fake news, if it is on Twitter, then it will be in terms of lead paragraphs on Facebook, more or less just giving context to what people want to read. And it has been very niche audience specific.
Kenyans are very active on WhatsApp, they're very active on Telegram. This has fueled a lot of fake news, and some of these conversations that start online, they influence our conversations offline.
It goes to churches, it goes to the marketplace, it goes to the bus stops, wherever people gather to congregate, and wherever Kenyans congregate, they discuss politics. It is very, very effective.
From all that we have seen, both sides are doing it, but one side is more sophisticated than the other, or one side is more organized. It's more strategic about how it puts the information out there. So there are no prizes for guessing which side that is.
Again, that would be the side backing the incumbent, President Uhuru Kenyatta. Looming over this story is the dark cloud of 2007-2008. Polls had Odinga leading, much like the fake news reports predicting a Kenyatta victory this time. And when the result went the other way, 2 months of violence followed, claiming more than 1,000 lives. Various government inquiries were called into the way that election was conducted and how it was covered. Within a year, the country's media law was changed. The government gave itself the power to raid media offices and control broadcast content in order, it argued, to keep the peace. Many Kenyan journalists called it a gag law in disguise. Now, less than a decade later, that law appears obsolete, since the bulk of the media malpractice in Kenya is not on the air or in print, it's online.
Social media is not governed by advertising laws in Kenya. And therefore, everybody has the freedom in anonymity to put up whatever they wish to put up on social spaces. And the forces that are churning out this information, they are 3 steps ahead of these people who are trying to man the internet. So it becomes not a very easy thing to curb information from spreading because of the speed at which messages are sent online.
The election laws provide that, first of all, election advertising must be clearly marked. And the Electoral Commission can take action. It can actually suspend parties from campaigning. Now, when you take it to those online platforms, or even that video we saw, where you have freelancers posting things on Facebook and Twitter, or exchanging messages on WhatsApp, so the Electoral Commission is in a fix. It is almost impossible for the Electoral Commission to tell who is posting those things.
Tracing the sources of online content is a challenge, and one of the reasons it is difficult to prove allegations that a US-based company called Cambridge Analytica, which also has offices in London, is working for President Kenyatta. As its website boasts, the company says it can change audience behavior through the mass harvesting and analysis of voter data. CA has been credited with playing a central role in the Donald Trump election campaign, whose surrogates were often accused of producing fake news. CA did work for the Kenyatta campaign in 2013, but refuses to confirm or deny detailed reports in The Star, a Nairobi paper, that it's involved in this campaign as well. However, when Kenyans see the proliferation of fake news, the branding of Raila Odinga as Crooked Rila on a website that appears to be behind that Rila attack video, they hear distinct echoes of what American voters were getting last year. And it's understandable why President Kenyatta, in a country still trying to move past its long colonial history, would not want voters making the link between his campaign and a foreign company like Cambridge Analytica.
Kenyatta, in 2013, he was going out with an anti-imperialist message. Now, some people would say that it's his way of dealing with the imperialists, fighting with them using their own tools.
A lot of people are drawing parallels between this election and that of the 2016, the US presidential election, where they say that he who has the big data owns the future. And there's general belief that, although they might deny this or fail to comment, that the Cambridge Analytica has a hand in all this.
Cambridge Analytica told the Listening Post it has no connection to the Rila 2020 video, but refuses to say what services, if any, it's providing the Kenyatta campaign. That's the kind of non-clarification that, in a story rife with forged logos, fabricated bylines, and all kinds of fake news, fits right in. Kenya votes on Tuesday, in an election in which neither candidate, neither side, comes out clean. That much we know. On the download now, our viewers on the coverage of the upcoming election in Kenya.
Fake news is not a new phenomenon. It's just that it's taken on a new form. It's just becoming more sophisticated. More than 2 decades ago, we would have fake news in the form of leaflets that are spread outside Nairobi. However, now, because it's the era of social media and information travels really fast, you just are able to get the information faster, but at the same time, you're able to get the corrections faster.
I do not believe that we're going to see a change in the Kenyan voting trends based on fake news. What will happen is just information that is not true will just be spread, and opinions will be made, but not necessarily influencing the vote.
Other media stories that are on our radar this week. Israeli forces operating in Ramallah on the West Bank have raided dozens of media offices, and the Prime Minister is vowing to shut down Al Jazeera. Among the news organizations raided July 29th, Al-Quds News, Al-Mayadeen, Al-Manar, and Russia Today. Equipment was seized, as well as documents and the video archive belonging to the Al-Quds newspaper. Al-Quds is the largest Palestinian daily and says its office in Hebron saw a similar raid 2 weeks ago. Israeli forces say the operation was designed to stamp out incitement. But the New York-based Committee to Protect Journalists argues Israeli soldiers cannot simply allege incitement and raid broadcasters' offices. We call on the Israeli military to return all equipment it seized immediately and stop harassing the press. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's threat to pass legislation to shut down Al Jazeera was delivered on Facebook. He said that through its coverage of the prolonged standoff at the Al-Aqsa compound, the Al Jazeera network continues to incite violence around the Temple Mount. Al Jazeera said the network will continue covering the news and events of the occupied Palestinian territories professionally and objectively. It's becoming increasingly difficult for web users in both Russia and China to get information online that their governments don't want them to see, as both the Kremlin and Beijing are cracking down on the use of VPNs, virtual private networks. This past week, Russian President Vladimir Putin approved a new law that comes into effect November 1st. It prohibits the use of VPNs and proxy servers. VPNs are often used to mask someone's digital footprint by appearing to change their location. The Kremlin says the measures will serve as a deterrent to those looking for illegal content on the dark web, citing drug traffickers and dealers in child pornography among the law's targets. Amnesty International is not buying that explanation, saying this is the latest blow in an assault on online freedom, which has seen critical sites blocked and social media users prosecuted solely for what they post online. The ban on VPNs takes this shameful campaign a whole step further. The legal changes in Russia roughly coincided with an announcement from Apple, in which the company said it is pulling the plug on VPN apps that it hosts on its App Store in China. Apple says it's simply adhering to the law and cannot allow content deemed illegal in China. In January, the authorities in Beijing tightened restrictions online, requiring developers to acquire government licenses before operating VPNs there. After a tumultuous, precedent-setting, 11-day career as Donald Trump's chief spokesperson, what else is there left to say about the departed White House Communications Director, Anthony Scaramucci? The answer is... Thank you. Not much. A news story broke last month in Canada, one that has divided Canadians and their media outlets. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's Liberal government announced it had settled a lawsuit filed by Omar Khadr, a former prisoner at Guantanamo Bay, by paying Khadr 10.5 million Canadian dollars, about 8 million US. Canadians watching or reading conservative news outlets tended to come away outraged. Khadr, they were told, was a convicted terrorist who had confessed, or so it seemed, to killing an American soldier in Afghanistan. Those exposed to a more liberal treatment of the story were informed that Khadr was a child soldier, just 15 years old at the time of his alleged crime, that he had been held at Guantanamo illegally, that he had been tortured there, that his confession, therefore, would not stand up in court, and that he was more of a victim of the so-called war on terror than a participant. In addition to the arguments over Khadr taking place on the Canadian airwaves, his conservative critics, including members of Parliament, have taken the battle for public opinion to American news outlets, recruiting them to tell their side of the Khadr story. The Listening Post's Johanna Husnow on the competing narratives of the Omar Khadr case.
Anger at the apology and settlement given to Omar Khadr.
Does Omar Khadr deserve a $10.5
Omar
million
Khadr has been called a child soldier, a convicted terrorist,
Some people
and a
consider him a
torture
child
victim.
soldier, and others say he's a former Al-Qaeda terrorist.
At the core of the Omar Khadr story, and the way Canadians see it, is a basic contradiction. When polled on whether the Canadian government did the right thing by settling the case and giving Khadr 10.5 million Canadian dollars, 71% of respondents said no. However, in that same poll, when asked whether they thought Omar Khadr had been treated fairly, 42% said they weren't sure. That's a lot of Canadians venturing an opinion, admitting they do not know the facts.
This is human nature that when someone comes into a fortune, for whatever reason, there's a natural tendency for people to be kind of unsympathetic. Did this person really deserve all this money? You know, he seems to be someone with a questionable background. Why is this happening?
This is the kind of emotional storm that overtakes a whole population in times of heightened fear.
What did you think? Did you think he looked, you know, what a typical terrorist would look like?
We are now facing a global international crisis of fear of Muslims, fear of the other. And that's the backdrop for this.
Omar Khadr was 15 years old and badly wounded when he was captured in Afghanistan, less than a year after the 9/11 attacks. He was accused of throwing the grenades that killed an American soldier in a firefight between US forces and Taliban fighters, the details of which remain shrouded in the fog of war. We do know Khadr was 9 years old when his father took him to Afghanistan, that he was the youngest prisoner at Guantanamo Bay, that he was tortured there, and that the federal court in Ottawa ruled that the Canadian government's complicity in the case breached Khadr's rights under Canadian law. The United Nations called him a child soldier. Since World War II, it said, no child has been prosecuted for a war crime, and the Khadr precedent may endanger the status of child soldiers all over the world. Khadr was transferred to a Canadian prison in 2012 and released by the courts in 2015 over the protest of former Prime Minister Stephen Harper and his government. The Omar Khadr who emerged in front of the cameras found that all that time in Guantanamo, years that he had spent incommunicado, had shaped him in the eyes of Canadians.
I'll prove to them that I'm a good person.
Because there's so little to work with for the media to draw from in terms of images of Omar Khadr throughout the years, actual quotes from him, the little materials that we have had at our disposal have sort of been malleable, and people have been able to kind of form whatever narrative they want to. And for a long time, especially his capture in 2002, the mood was not one of much compassion for people who were accused of links to terrorism.
If you work for a media organization that has played up the idea of Omar Khadr as being a kind of super terrorist, you're vested in that narrative and you don't have a lot of incentive to go out and find contrary facts. The other thing is that covering the Omar Khadr story took a massive investment in journalistic resources. You have to often spend weeks or months trying to get access to sources at Guantanamo, going through official channels, subjecting yourself to security clearances. It can be a full-time job covering that one story.
And there was just one Canadian journalist who committed to the Khadr story, Michelle Shepard of the Toronto Star. Backed by editors who refused to let the story go, Shepard traveled to Guantanamo Bay 27 times to report on Khadr, eventually producing a documentary on the case.
You want to go back to Canada? Well, there's not anything I can do about that.
Shepard's film included a visit Canadian officials made to Guantanamo in 2003. Khadr mistakenly thought they were there to help him and appeared devastated when the visit turned into yet another interrogation.
Put your hand down.
No, you don't care about me.
In 2010, Omar Khadr pled guilty to the charges against him. His lawyers say it was the only way that he could get out of Guantanamo and that the torture he endured made any confession legally meaningless. After Khadr's release, various polls indicated Canadians had come to view Khadr with growing sympathy, but the coverage remained divided. Competing narratives, both powered by terminology and imagery.
This is the important question. How language has been weaponized, and so journalists are caught between, are they terrorists, are they freedom fighters, is there moral equivalence going on here, how do we tell the story in a way that is fair to both sides, but maybe fairness is not something that journalism is capable of doing. Even if you tell this story in the most neutral way possible, there will be someone who says, you're on the wrong side of this.
You will see pictures of a devilish Omar Khadr, some of which are of dubious origin, some of which might not be of Omar Khadr. You'll see pictures which are of him working in a makeshift explosives factory, and these pictures will be used to convince you, don't be fooled, he's a terrorist. On the other hand, you'll see pictures of him as a smiling boy from his passport photo. You'll see pictures of him from his current life as a nursing student in Edmonton. You can pick whatever type of depiction you want depending on what your purpose is.
All of these things create a certain narrative. These things have diverged so much that they're essentially two completely different stories. And if you talk to people in the media, depending on which side you're talking to, there's no real dialogue between those two sides of the media, because although the protagonist in each story is the same, the stories are completely divergent.
He was groomed by his father.
War criminal Omar Khadr.
But this has been the case since 9/11. Omar Khadr is just an example of a larger divergence in narrative that's taken place throughout the entire media between left and right on the issue of what causes terrorism.
That left-right divide also exists at the political level, between supporters of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's Liberal government, which approved Khadr's multi-million-dollar payout, and the Conservatives, some of whom were part of the former government of ex-Prime Minister Stephen Harper, who fought to keep Khadr behind bars. Two Conservative parliamentarians took their complaints over the Khadr settlement to the US news media, the Wall Street Journal and Fox News, both owned by Rupert Murdoch. They used those platforms to provide simplified versions of a complex Canadian legal case to Americans.
Michelle Rempel went on Tucker Carlson, of all the hosts on Fox Network.
I want you to know that most Canadians are absolutely outraged about this.
Tucker Carlson is almost the most identified with racially divisive and racially exploitive coverage and commentary, and he didn't disappoint in that episode either.
If Khadr lived on your street, he'd probably be the richest guy in your neighborhood. How did he make his money? Well, first he joined the Taliban.
Both Michelle Rempel and Peter Kent know better. They know that the confession is not only improperly obtained, but that no criminal lawyer worth their salt would even think that they were true. And I just think that's deeply and profoundly unfair to the Canadian people to be trying to stoke these kinds of negative emotions around an issue that deserves a very sober, reflective, and responsible approach.
The strategy that the Conservative Party is taking in leapfrogging the Canadian media, and talking to Fox News, talking to the Wall Street Journal, trying to get the most angry sectors of the American media in a Trump era as heated and angry as possible, that is something we haven't seen in Canada yet. It's going to have repercussions. It's going to have repercussions for Muslim people in Canada, and I think it's going to have repercussions for the discourse in Canada.
And finally, political propaganda in China has been undergoing a bit of a makeover. Beijing has turned to rap tunes and animated music videos sung in English to appeal to a younger audience. And this summer, the political messaging has turned cinematic. Moviegoers are seeing some of China's biggest and richest actors and celebrities talking up core socialist values on behalf of the ruling Communist Party. A series of 4 videos called The Glory and the Dream, Our Chinese Dream, arrived in theaters last month, and to put it kindly, the response has been mixed. Even the state-owned newspaper, the Global Times, reported that some ticket holders are turning up late to skip the propaganda segment. And some of our viewers may leave early for the same reason. But then where else are you going to see Jackie Chan these days lighting up the big screen? We'll see you next time here at The Listening Post.
中国梦是国家的梦，民族的梦，也是每个中国人的梦。
人世间的美好梦想，只有通过诚实的劳动才能实现。
心往一处想，劲往一处使，就能实现我们的梦想。
不管你是什么职业，只
只要对得起国家、社会、民族、家人，你就是在给中国梦的实现助力。
国家好，民族好，大家才会好。只有每个人都为美好梦想而奋斗，才能汇聚起实现中国梦的磅礴力量。